Grant Whitmore was 26 years old, and he worked from home as a customer support specialist for a software company based in Dallas, Texas. He was the youngest of 4 children. His father had passed away when Grant was still in college, leaving his mother, Linda, to raise the family with the help of her 3 older kids, Marcus, Chase, and Denise. Marcus was the oldest, and he ran the house like he was still in charge of it, even though he was 34 and married with his own place 2 streets away. He rarely helped with chores unless it suited him, and he almost never gave money toward the household bills, even though he earned a decent living managing a small auto shop. Growing up, Grant had learned early on that arguing with Marcus rarely led anywhere good. Marcus had a sharp temper, the kind that could turn a normal conversation into a shouting match within a few sentences, and their mother, exhausted from raising 4 children mostly on her own after their father passed, had gotten into the habit of simply avoiding conflict with him rather than confronting it directly. Over time, that habit had settled into something like an unspoken rule in the household. Whatever Marcus wanted, whatever Marcus decided, mostly went unquestioned, even when it clearly wasn't fair to everyone else. 2 years earlier, Marcus had gotten married, and Grant had supported him through the whole thing. He had paid for a good chunk of the wedding, helped cover the honeymoon, and even quietly paid off a personal loan Marcus had taken out before the wedding, just so his brother could start married life without that weight hanging over him. Grant never asked for anything back. He simply thought that was what family did for each other. A year later, it was Grant's turn. He had fallen in love with a young woman named Bailey during a mutual friend's birthday party, and after dating for several months, the two decided they wanted to get married. Bailey's family lived across town, and they turned out to be warm, generous people who welcomed Grant into their lives without hesitation. Bailey's mother, Carol, especially took a liking to him, often inviting him over for dinner and treating him like a son long before the wedding was even planned. Grant remembered the first time Carol had invited him to a family dinner, nervous the whole drive over, expecting the kind of careful, guarded politeness he had grown used to at his own family's table. Instead, Carol had handed him an apron before he even sat down, insisting he help with the mashed potatoes while Bailey's father asked him easy, friendly questions about his job and his hobbies. It had felt, that evening, like stepping into a completely different version of what a family dinner could be, and Grant had driven home afterward with a strange, unfamiliar lightness in his chest. Grant's sister Denise, however, seemed to dislike Bailey from the very first meeting, for reasons Grant never fully understood. Bailey was 19, soft-spoken, and respectful, the kind of person who rarely said an unkind word about anyone. Whenever Bailey's family visited the Whitmore house, Denise would grow cold and distant, sometimes refusing to come out of her room entirely, even though Bailey's parents had never said or done anything to deserve that treatment. Denise lived in a rental house right next door to their mother's place, close enough that she often heard the sound of Bailey's family arriving through her own kitchen window. More than once, Grant noticed the curtains shift slightly whenever Carol's car pulled into the driveway, though Denise never came over to actually join them. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed to grow more difficult toward Grant the closer the wedding got, and Grant slowly began to suspect it had something to do with jealousy over how well things were going with Bailey's family, compared to the tension that had settled into his own marriage over the past year. By early spring, the wedding date was set for April. Grant quickly realized he didn't have enough saved to cover the full cost, so he borrowed $15,000 from a coworker he trusted, and he also proposed something else to help close the remaining gap. Carol, Bailey's mother, was part of a small savings circle with a few of her close friends, the kind where each member contributed a set amount every month, and the full pooled amount rotated to a different member each cycle. Grant asked his siblings if they would each join and contribute, explaining that if they all joined together, the payout would land before the wedding and help cover the remaining costs. Marcus, Chase, and Denise all agreed. Grant felt relieved, believing his family was finally coming together to support him the way he had supported Marcus 2 years earlier. He should have known better. When the payout finally came through, just 2 weeks before the wedding, Marcus approached Grant and asked for $8,000 from the total, claiming he needed it for new clothes for himself and his wife, plus something extra to help out his wife's sister. Grant, not wanting to start a fight so close to the wedding, stayed quiet and let him take it, telling himself it would work out somehow. It did not work out. If you are enjoying this story so far, please like this video and subscribe for more emotional English stories. Now, let's continue. On the morning of the courthouse ceremony, Grant stood in his suit, ready to head to Bailey's family home, when he learned that Marcus and Denise had both decided not to come, claiming someone needed to stay behind and watch the house in case guests dropped by. Grant felt something twist painfully in his chest. He thought of his father, gone for years now, and wished more than anything that he could have been there instead. Fighting back tears, Grant gathered the handful of relatives who were willing to come and went to the ceremony without his siblings. He remembered standing in front of the mirror that morning, adjusting his tie with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking, listening to the sound of Marcus's truck pulling out of the driveway earlier than usual, off to run some vague errand he hadn't bothered to explain. Grant had told himself, right up until the last possible moment, that his brother would show up anyway, that the excuse about watching the house was just talk, and that Marcus would eventually appear at the courthouse steps with some half-hearted apology for running late. He never did. The next day was worse. The formal wedding reception was set to begin in the early afternoon, and Grant stood in his rented suit, waiting for his family to get ready to leave together. Once again, Marcus and Denise refused to come, repeating the same excuse about watching the house. Grant felt his throat tighten as he stood there, alone, remembering how his father used to walk with pride whenever family occasions came around. He allowed himself a few private tears before pulling himself together and heading to the venue with only a small group of relatives beside him. His mother had come, at least, riding along quietly in the passenger seat, saying very little the entire drive. Grant had wanted, more than anything, to ask her directly why she wasn't doing more to convince Marcus and Denise to come, but something about the tired, resigned look on her face had kept him from pushing the question, as though some part of him already sensed she felt just as powerless to change their minds as he did. When Carol asked, gently, where the rest of his family was, Grant simply gave her a small, tired look, and she seemed to understand immediately, without him needing to explain further. She quietly stepped in, making sure no guest noticed anything out of place, protecting Grant's dignity in front of everyone, without drawing any attention to what was missing. When Grant and Bailey returned to his mother's house that evening for the traditional family welcome, following the custom of being walked up to the door by family members, nobody stepped forward to do it. Not Marcus, not Denise, not even his own mother, who stood near the doorway but didn't move to help either of them inside. That night, sitting quietly with Bailey in their new bedroom, Grant finally broke down completely, resting his head in her lap and crying until he had nothing left. The formal reception the following weekend played out the same way. Nobody from his immediate family attended. In the months after the wedding, Grant kept paying the monthly installment on the savings circle entirely by himself, since Marcus, Chase, and Denise had all quietly stopped contributing their shares, despite having already benefited from the payout Grant had organized. He said nothing about it, mostly because he didn't have the energy left to fight another battle. Then, in late summer, everything changed. Carol called Grant one afternoon, her voice tight with concern. "I need to ask you something, and please don't be offended," she said. "One of the other women in our savings circle mentioned that your brother approached her separately, asking to join a second circle under a different name. When she checked around, she found out he's been doing this with at least 2 other groups around town, taking payouts and disappearing before his turn came to pay back in." Grant sat in stunned silence for a moment. "Are you sure it's him? She sent me a picture from one of the group chats," Carol said. "It's him!" Grant leaned back against his kitchen counter, the phone still pressed to his ear, feeling the ground shift slightly beneath a version of events he had believed, uncomfortably for months now. He had assumed his brother's coldness during the wedding was simple jealousy, or maybe old resentment finally boiling over. It had never occurred to him that there might be an entirely different, more calculated reason sitting underneath all of it. "What do you want to do?" Carol asked gently. "I don't want to cause more pain for your family, Grant, especially not right after everything you've already been through, but I also can't let my friends keep getting pulled into this without at least warning you. I need to talk to my mother," Grant said slowly, "and I think I need Chase's help first, before anyone else gets involved." That evening, Grant called Chase, the one sibling who had stayed mostly neutral throughout the wedding disaster, neither joining in the exclusion nor standing up against it. Chase listened quietly as Grant explained what Carol had discovered. "That actually explains a lot," Chase said slowly. "Marcus has been weird about money for over a year now. I found some paperwork in his truck a few months back, notices from a collection agency. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured it wasn't my business. Do you think that's why he pushed so hard for me to set up the savings circle before the wedding?" Grant asked. "Like he was using my wedding as cover to run the same trick on more people?" Chase was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, yeah, I think that's exactly what happened." The 2 brothers agreed to bring everything to their mother together, laying out the evidence plainly, rather than letting rumors spread the way they usually did in their family. Linda listened in stunned silence as Chase explained the collection notices, and as Grant explained what Carol had discovered about the second and third saving circles Marcus had apparently been running through. "He told me he needed that money from the wedding circle to help you both start out right," Linda said quietly, looking suddenly much older than she had that morning. "He made it sound like he was helping. He wasn't helping anyone but himself," Grant said, his voice steady despite the years of hurt sitting behind it. "And I think that's part of why he pushed so hard for Denise and me to stay out of things at the wedding. He didn't want extra attention on our family, right when he needed people trusting him for these new circles he was setting up." Linda sat down slowly at the kitchen table, pressing her hand to her forehead. "I let him convince me not to help you and Bailey up those stairs. He told me it would look better if the whole family arrived together properly, and that we should wait for him and Denise. I didn't realize until right now that they never intended to come at all. I wish you had believed me sooner," Grant said honestly. "But I understand now that he was managing all of you as carefully as he was managing me." A family meeting followed a week later. tense and uncomfortable, where Marcus was confronted directly with the collection notices, the statements from Carol's savings circle, and the pattern Chase had quietly pieced together over the following days. Marcus tried denying it at first, then grew defensive, then finally admitted, in a smaller and more subdued voice than Grant had ever heard him use, that he had been in serious debt for over a year and had been using new savings circles to cover older debts, moving the problem around instead of solving it. "How much do you actually owe, total?" Chase asked, his arms crossed, refusing to let Marcus soften the answer the way he usually managed to soften every uncomfortable conversation. "I don't know exactly," Marcus admitted, staring at the table rather than meeting anyone's eyes. "Somewhere around 40,000, maybe more, once everything is added up." The room went quiet. Even Linda, who had spent years finding ways to excuse Marcus's temper and his selfishness, seemed unable to find any explanation this time that made the situation smaller than it actually was. "And the wedding," Grant said carefully, watching his brother's face for any flicker of honesty. "Was that ever really about helping me and Bailey get started? Or was it about getting a fresh circle of people you hadn't already burned through yet?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment before finally answering. "Both, maybe. I told myself it was about you at first. But once the money was actually there, sitting in front of me, it got harder to remember that part." Denise's part in the wedding exclusion turned out to be simpler and sadder than Grant expected. She admitted, quietly and with visible embarrassment, that her own marriage had been struggling for months, and watching Grant build something happy and supported with Bailey's family had stirred up jealousy she wasn't proud of and hadn't known how to handle like an adult. "I kept telling myself it wasn't about you," Denise said, twisting a paper napkin between her fingers as she spoke. "But every time I saw Carol at your place, laughing with you, treating you like her own son already, it just made everything with my own marriage feel worse by comparison. I didn't know what to do with that feeling, so I just avoided all of it instead." "That doesn't make what you did okay," Grant told her honestly. "You let me walk into my own wedding feeling completely abandoned. That's going to take real time for me to get past." "I know," Denise said, her eyes wet. "I'm not asking you to just forget it. I'm asking for a chance to actually earn something better. Slowly. If you're willing to give me that chance eventually." Grant didn't offer forgiveness that day, and he didn't pretend the hurt from his wedding had simply disappeared, because the truth had finally come out. But he did agree to keep talking with Chase, and, cautiously, with his mother, rebuilding something honest instead of returning to the old silence that had let Marcus manipulate the whole family for so long. As for Marcus, Grant made clear he would no longer be covering his brother's debts or protecting him from consequences. Marcus eventually worked out a repayment plan with the women from Carol's savings circle, an uncomfortable and humbling process he had to manage entirely on his own for the first time in years. 6 months after the wedding, sitting on the porch of the small house he and Bailey had moved into, Grant found himself thinking less about the empty seats at his reception and more about the family he had actually built since then. Bailey beside him every evening, Carol calling just to check in on him the way a mother should, and Chase, slowly but steadily, becoming someone Grant could actually count on. Chase had started coming by most Sunday afternoons, sometimes bringing his kids along, sometimes just sitting on the porch with Grant and a couple of beers, talking about nothing important in the easy way brothers were supposed to talk. It had taken months to rebuild even that much trust, but it felt sturdier, Grant thought, than the years of silence and unspoken tension that had come before it. Linda had started calling more often, too. Careful, tentative calls that usually began with small talk about the weather or a recipe she'd tried, before eventually working their way towards something closer to an apology, offered a little at a time rather than all at once. Grant appreciated the effort, even when it felt awkward, understanding that some kinds of trust simply took longer to rebuild than others, no matter how badly both people wanted to skip ahead to the easier part. "You okay?" Bailey asked, settling in beside him with 2 glasses of iced tea. "Yeah," Grant said, and for the first time in a long while, he meant it completely. "I used to think that day ruined everything. Now I think it just showed me who was actually going to show up. Once I stopped assuming everyone automatically would." Bailey leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat there together as the evening settled quietly over the street, no longer waiting for anyone who wasn't already right there beside them. If you liked this story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.